Welcome to another episode from Carl's Cycle Supply. Today we're going over Knucklehead history and this gorgeously restored Skyway Blue 1942 EL. In 1942, Harley-Davidson had hopes of continuing the previous year's upward market trend. However, the United States of America was pulled into World War II on December 7th, 1941. The motor company produced 1,419 overhead valve models. This is pretty impressive considering our nation's manufacturing capabilities were turned upside down as the U.S. began to focus on the supply demands for the global war effort. Now, it's really important to point this out because everything about 1942 Harley-Davidsons are bizarre. A 42 Harley-Davidson Knucklehead in the deluxe sport solo package is without a doubt the flashiest, most decked out OEM Knucklehead you could buy from the factory. Even though Harley aimed to sell a ton of these flashy, decadent bikes, the world had other plans. A relatively low number of new 1942 Knuckleheads that were produced before Pearl Harbor was bombed were really the shiniest and prettiest Knuckleheads made, and their potential productions, I believe, were cut short because the war going on, and it just was a challenging year. Most bikes were likely ordered as standard or mid-range models, and knowing this, it is safe to say that a deluxe sports solo 1942 overhead valve like the Skyway Blue one in this video is extremely rare and pretty cool. If you were to go to your local dealer and order a new 1942, you would have been able to choose from Skyway Blue, Flight Red, Cruiser Green, or Brilliant Black. They also had a police gray, but this color was only reserved for police bikes. You could order your new 1942 in one of three equipment groups or packages, right? So the packages were basically the same as 41 except for the addition of chrome crash bars. Take a quick look of all the additional options on the order blank here, on this order form, right? There are a lot more options to deck out your bike on top of whatever package group you ordered your bike in. 1942 was the first year chrome-plated fender tips showed up on the order blank form as well, and these are stamped out of brass with an intricately embossed eagle stamped into them. These fender tips didn't show up on another order form until 1947 because of the war. All right, guys, let's talk about updates. New features and parts that were ushered in the short production run in 1942. All of the overhead valve models had long-ribbed reinforcements added to the left side of the engine case. The cross-section on the case above the timing plug was also beefed up and reinforced. The serial number boss and the area by the top stud were all beefed up as well. In 1940 and 1941, they have the toughest lives out of Knuckleheads because they suffered fractures and cracking early on in their life. So by the time 1942 came around, they were like, all right, we're going to beef up and reinforce our cases. So after the new beefy left case came out, all of the previous problems, they became a thing of the past. As long as the engine was properly assembled and maintained and enjoyed, the cases would virtually last forever. Let's move on to some other changes, like the oil pump casting. The oil pump casting was changed and the chain oiler screw now goes into the body at an angle. The feed gear was changed as well and no longer had a groove cut in it to feed the primary chain oiler. The tappet blocks had a small transitional change in 1942 as well. Early blocks were counterbored in 1936 to 41, but during production in 42, they started to countersink them. Harley ran on the old style front lifter blocks before they ran out of the rears. Our shop is just finishing up a restoration on a primo original 1942 Knucklehead that had mismatched lifter blocks. Both the lifter blocks and oil pump had traces of original white paint on them. 42 was the first year for white lifter blocks for white paint on the lifter blocks and oil pumps. Now, these are my personal favorite lifter blocks. I love early pre-war Knuckleheads, mostly 37s and 38s, but when it comes to the lifter blocks, I love, love, love the white 42 ones. I like those the most. Anyways, the reason why Harley used white was due to the fact that silver paint, which has small ground up specks of aluminum in it, was briefly discontinued due to war rations. Our country and the rest of the world needed that aluminum to win the war. Interestingly enough, though, there is questions about this, but interestingly enough, 42 and 43 carburetors were still painted silver. I believe that this is because there must have been a stockpile of civilian carbs over at the Linkert factory in Indianapolis. In 44, Linkert eventually ran out of silver carbs and started using black ones. You'll see the black ones on 44, 45, 46. It's really common to see them those 3 years. Aluminum oil lines were phased out of inventory too, and it looks like the first year Harley ran out of the early flare nuts without the shoulder on them was also in 42 as well. The overhead valve oil line that fed the rocker boxes was updated to flare fittings that are compressed by a 9/16 packing nut rather than the normal banjo bolts like the 36. Fuel system maintenance was greatly improved as well by discontinuing the 39 to 41 style filter, which proved to be so difficult to service and take apart. Harley brought back the design previously used in 38 and earlier fuel strainers, but improved it in several ways. Now, the cap that holds the screen in place is made out of steel and has straight course knurling on it, which makes it easier to remove and clean. So those are some really great improvements. Also, the gas line fitting is pressed in rather than being threaded into the body. This new improved strainer was also CAD plated and gas lines were electroless nickel plated. Before we move on to the chassis upgrades, be sure to hit the like and subscribe. 42 premiered a much more simple horn mount system. Delco Remy started riveting a strap on the back of the horn when it was assembled at their factory. This was so much simpler than the 41 and earlier mounts. The lower mount that bolts to the fender was heightened, and it has slots in it now for the 1024 screws that secure it. The top mount is spring mounted, and it has shoulder bolts that are made out of cold rolled 1/2-inch hex stock. The simplified horn mount system didn't have a provision for setting or like a place for the headlight terminal. This situation was addressed with the creation of black bakelite plates that were they had 2 holes. They have right here, you see 2 holes in it for electrical terminal provisions. All 42 to 45 civilian bikes use this terminal plate and had a 1032 Phillips head screw on the left side hole for the headlight power and wires to hang out and transfer electricity. If we go to the front end, it's very similar to 1941 models. The front leg had the little peak in between the spring bosses, and early legs had a number 8, and late 42 front legs had number 9. The brake shackle that holds the brake backing plate to the rear leg was widened and made thicker. The fork rockers had bosses under the grease zerks, which added an 1/8 inch of material to tap for the grease zerks. The brake lever was simplified. The new lever only has 2 holes in it for your brake cable holder to attach to compared to the previous style, which had 4 holes and also had Solo and SC stamped into the lever. So by eliminating the stamped words and 2 holes, they saved a lot of money on every brake lever they made after that. If you wanted a top-of-the-line deluxe sports solo bike in 1942, you unknowingly got a new and improved squashed bird. The difference is small and tough to see unless you looked underneath the bike. The 42 squash birds are held to the fender with two 1024 threaded nuts rather than spring clips like the previous year. You will notice the chrome crash bars on deluxe sports solo bikes. This is the only year they were offered on a Knucklehead, and wouldn't be on an order form or road bike for another 8 years. Yeah, that's a long time. All models in 1942 were treated to a newly designed taillight. Harley introduced rubber gaskets for the red lens and the outlook lenses. Another small detail is the new gasket that goes in between the taillight cover and the fender. 39 to 41, rubber gasket, 42, thick felt gasket material. When Harley came out with the Tombstone light in 1947, the factory switched the gasket material once again to foam. 1942 deluxe saddlebags are very similar to the 41 saddlebags. They both have 5-hole chrome mounting plates, Bossed Wing logos on the flap, as well as nickel-plated brass badges. 1942 bags were glammed up a bit more than those available in 41. Mills Co., the company that made seats and saddlebags for Harley, added a bunch of nickel-plated studs to dress up the saddlebag flaps. On top of that, they also added a V pattern on the body of the bags, comprised of 5 more nickel-plated stars. These bags are bedazzled to the nines. Like they're really glitzy. The new bedazzled bags combined with the glow bright mounting jewels and deluxe solo seats command your attention. I mean, it makes the bikes almost glow in the dark. And I'm sure if certain events would have happened on the global stage, Harley would have had a record-breaking year and would have sold more bikes. Now, let's go ahead and move on to the Skyway Blue bike that's in this video. Hands down, one of my favorites. When I first started dating Matt, it was on the lift, and I remember always coming in and seeing the blue 42, and it was so cool.
That candy girl of mine.
Thanks for taking some time to go over the historical stuff of 1942. Every time I think about this bike, it makes me smile. Even though it was in rough condition and we started with crumbs, it was still a complete bike, and the core of it had been together for a long time. This is a great bike that we built for our friends Jason and Don back in 2011. Don was on a vintage automobile cross-country run and found a lead on an old Harley-Davidson Knucklehead in South America. He followed the lead on the bike, and it led him down to an old 41 Knucklehead with a sidecar that was being used to sell ice cream down in Mexico. The bike was in very rough condition, and you could tell that it was kept going with a lot of repairs and whatever they could do to keep it as a usable form of transportation and commerce. The motor, unfortunately, had been put in replacement long rib cases during his life, which probably happened early on. The front leg and the frame indicated that it had to be a late 41 or early 42. The headlight and taillight and other parts were long gone. After close inspection of everything, we knew we needed to find a bunch of parts and a set of either late 41 cases or early or mid 42 cases. Being so long ago, before I even had an iPhone, I had to go to the Rolodex for the shop and page through the contacts and start my search for parts. By the time I got to the end of the D section, I had located a really nice set of 42 cases from my friend and mentor Dale Waxler. The cases were in great shape and didn't require any welding or machining. We replaced the races, line lapped them, we rebuilt the bottom end, fit new pistons to original Yale cylinders, did some minimal fin repair on the cylinders and heads, which is to be expected, replaced the valves and seats, put new springs in, straightened out the tins, the whole enchilada. We sent the fenders to our friend Larry in Ohio, who worked his magic over them. He's one of the greatest guys for straightening this stuff out, and it's always worth the wait. When Larry was done, he sent them back in primer, ready for paint. Don and Jason wanted to paint their 42 Skyway blue. They also wanted a deluxe sports solo package. Let's talk about the wheels. Wheels are one of the most important things on a restored bike. You've got to have the right stuff because everybody looks at them when they walk up to the bike. This bike has original Kelsey Hayes rims that we had re-chrome plated just like originals. They only polished the flat parts on the outside of the rim and left the inside part bare and kind of frosted. These hubs are also the correct third style of hubs that Harley made for Star hubs. They're sweated construction and have a counterbore around the greaser. The other part that was very hard to locate was a pair of squash bird fender badges. I had to use the best one off of our original Paint 41EL as a pattern and made these ones for this bike. I took one of the badges off and made a latex mold of it so we could investment cast some for the bike. Since casting them, we've moved on to stamping them out of brass and make it more authentic. It was important to Jason and Don to have the bike set up as a rider that they could enjoy. We put a geared up belt drive in the primaries for ease of maintenance. This is one of the best things you can do for an old bike if you want to improve your riding and ownership experience. The belt drive gears up the bike, keeps the RPMs down, and makes for a better, smoother, and more quiet ride down the old highway. Best part is not having to adjust primary chains and all the other extra adjustments that come along with that. Don also wanted 12-volt electrics to have brighter lights, more dependable coil, and more available batteries or light bulbs when he was out on the road. This is a pretty mellow update and easy to switch back to 6-volt if you ever want to do that, but I really like leaving them 12-volt. We used NOS rubber mats on the floorboards and used original brake and clutch pedals that we reparkerized. We were lucky enough to use original re-chrome 40 to 44 brass nameplates. The bike was one of the first bikes to use one of our 41 to 49 reproduction mufflers that we talked about in the last video. We had the bike judged at an AMCA meet when it was finished, and after a half hour or so of close inspection by some of the best volunteer AMCA judges, the bike scored 96 out of 100. That is a really great score considering that it had a 12-volt electric system and took a heavy point deduction for generator and the coil. This score put it in the junior first category, and Jason's been riding it ever since. It always feels good to bring one back from the dead, and it's been enjoyed, maintained, and has fostered a great friendship between two families. And it's just an awesome example of how old motorcycles have shrunk the world and brought all sorts of different people into our lives, and we've gotten to work for a cool cross-section of people and made new friends that I wouldn't have the opportunity to meet if it wasn't for old motorcycles. The end. Oh, if you like old motorcycles and like these videos we're doing, come back and watch more. Hit the like and subscribe button, as the kids say nowadays, and have a good day, and I hope you have fun with your old motorcycles.
Bye, guys!
As the kids say nowadays. I love saying that. That's what Dale used to say all the time. As the kids say nowadays. I don't even remember what phrase it was.